critique of Sam and his book, I want to say that we do share one, very important belief, and that is that both of us feel that it's time to stop tolerating the intolerant, and that societies that tolerate the intolerant, that eventually both the tolerant disappear and tolerance along with them. And so I do laud Sam for his courage. And as you heard that Bob said, I just wrote a book on the Christian right called American Fascists, the Christian Right and the War in America. So on that, I laud Sam for standing up. But I come from a religious background. I guess in some vague way I still consider myself religious. And I think Sam, in my mind, has conflated faith, which I hold of some importance, with tribalism. I think his book is an attack not so much on faith, but on a system of being and believing that is dangerous and is compatible with the open society. But what he attacks is superstition, a belief in magic, the childish notion of an anthropomorphic God that is characteristic of the tribe, of the closed society. And he calls this religion, and I do not. I think what Sam, in my mind, fails to grasp is not simply the meaning of faith, something that I'll address a little later on, but the supreme importance of the monotheistic traditions in creating the concept of the individual. This individualism, the belief that we can exist as distinct beings from the tribe or the crowd, and that we are called on as individuals to make moral decisions that at times defy the clamor of the tribe or the nation, is a gift of the Abrahamic faiths. This sense of individual responsibility is coupled with the constant injunctions in Islam, Judaism, and Christianity for a deep altruism, and this laid the foundations for the open society. This individualism is the central doctrine and most important contribution of monotheism. We are enjoined, after all, to love our neighbor, not our tribe. This empowerment of individual conscience is the starting point of the great ethical systems of our civilization. The prophets, and here I would include Jesus, helped institutionalize dissent and criticism. They initiated the separation of powers. They reminded us that culture and society was not the sole prerogative of the powerful, that freedom, and indeed the religious life, required us to often oppose and defy those in authority. God, as Sam points out, is a human concept. God is the name we give to our belief that life has meaning, one that transcends the world's chaos, randomness, and cruelty. To me, to argue about whether God exists or does not exist is futile. The question is not whether God exists. The question is whether we concern ourselves with or are utterly indifferent to the sanctity and ultimate transcendence of human existence. God is that mysterious force, and you can give it many names, as many religions do, which works upon us and through us to seek and achieve truth, beauty, and goodness. And God is perhaps best understood, to steal a line from Tillich, as our ultimate concern, that in which we should place our highest hopes, confidence, and trust. In Exodus, God says, by way of identification, I am that I am. And this is probably more accurately translated, I will be what I will be. I think God is better understood as a verb rather than a noun. God is not an asserted existence, but a process accomplishing itself. And God is inescapable. It is the life force that sustains, transforms, and defines all existence. The name of God is laden, thanks to our religious institutions and the numerous tyrants, charlatans, and demagogues these institutions have produced, with so much baggage and imagery that it's hard for us to see the intent behind the concept. The problem is not religion, but religious orthodoxy. Most moral thinkers, from Socrates to Christ to Francis of Assisi, eschewed the written word because they knew, I suspect, that once things were written down, they became, in the wrong hands, codified, and used not to promote morality, but conformity, subservience, and repression. Writing freezes speech. George Steiner calls this the decay into writing. The moment the writers of the gospel set down the words of Jesus, they began to kill it, to kill the message. There is no room for prophets within religious institutions, indeed within any institutions. For as Tillich knew, all human institutions, including the church, are inherently demonic. Tribal societies persecute and silence prophets. Open societies tolerate them at their fringes. And our prophets today come not usually from the church, but from our artists, poets, writers, those who follow their inner authority. Samuel Beckett's voice is one of modernity's most authentically religious. Beckett, like the author of Ecclesiastes, was a realist. He saw the pathetic, empty monuments we spend a lifetime building to ourselves. He knew, as we read in Ecclesiastes, that nothing is certain or permanent, real or unreal, and that the secret of wisdom is detachment without withdrawal, that since death awaits us all is vanity, that we must give up on the childish notion that one is rewarded for virtue or wisdom. Those who deform faith into creeds, who use it as a litmus test for institutional fidelity, root religion in a profane rather than a sacred context. They seek, like all who worship idols, to give the world a unity and coherence it does not possess. They ossify the message, and once ossified, it can never reach an existential level, never rise to ethical freedom, to faith. The more vast the gap between professed faith and acts of faith, the more vast our delusions about our own grandeur and importance, the more intolerant, aggressive, and dangerous we become. Faith is not in conflict with reason. Faith does not conflict with scientific truth unless faith claims to express a scientific truth. Faith can neither be affirmed nor denied by scientific, historical, or philosophical truth. And here I think Sam confuses the irrational, which he sees as part of faith, with the non-rational. There is a reality that is not a product of rational deduction. It is not accounted for by strict rational discourse. There is a spiritual dimension to human existence in the universe, but this is not irrational. It is non-rational. Faith allows us to transcend what Flaubert says was our mania for conclusions, a mania he described as one of humanity's most useless and sterile drives. We are at war with Islam, Sam writes in The End of Faith. It may not serve our immediate foreign policy objectives for our political leaders to openly acknowledge this fact, but it is unambiguously so. It is not merely that we are at war with an otherwise peaceful religion that has been hijacked by extremists. We are at war with precisely the vision of life that is prescribed to all Muslims in the Quran and further elaborated in the literature of the Hadith, which recounts the sayings and teachings of the Prophet. Sam assures us that the Quran mandates such hatred, that the problem is with Islam itself. He writes that Islam, more than any other religion human beings have devised, has all the makings of a thoroughgoing cult of death. Now, after studying 600 hours of Arabic, spending 7 years of my life in the Middle East, most of them as the Middle East bureau chief for the New York Times, I do not claim to be a scholar on Islam. But I know the Quran is emphatic about the rights of other religions to practice their own beliefs and unequivocally condemns attacks on civilians as a violation of Islam. The Quran states that suicide of any type is an abomination. More importantly, the tactic of suicide bombing was pioneered as a weapon of choice by the Tamils, who are chiefly Hindu, in Sri Lanka long before it was adopted by Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda, or Hamas. It is what you do when you do not have artillery or planes or missiles and you want to create maximum terror. I also know from my time in the Muslim world that the vast majority of the some 1 billion Muslims on the planet, most of whom are not Arab, are moderate, to test the violence done in the name of their religion and look at Pat Robertson or Franklin Graham, who demonize Muslims in the name of Christianity with the same horror and fear that we look at Osama bin Laden or the leaders of Hamas. The Palestinian resistance movement only took on radical Islam coloring in the 1990s, when conditions in Gaza and the West Bank deteriorated and thrust people into profound helplessness, despair, and poverty, similar conditions that are empowering the Christian right in our own country. The externalization of evil is used in Sam's book to endorse torture. He, of course, argues that the reason that requires us to waterboard detainees and the physical and moral black holes we have set up to make them disappear comes from the threat of terrorism.